Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watch One, and thanks for logging on. Today, we're looking at the Jaeger-LeCoultre Master Compressor GMT. Now, 41.5 millimeters in 18 karat rose gold. This watch is important for two reasons in JLC history. First, it was part of the early 2000s family of JLC master compressors that revived the sports watch tradition at the Sentier manufacturer. Although the company had an impressive back catalog of sports watches, including the Deepsea Alarm and the Polaris and the Polaris 2 of the 60s and 70s, the company didn't have a sports watch during the 1980s and the 1990s, so the master compressors represented an important comeback and a return to the catalog. This watch also contained the first release of the all-new caliber 975 auto tractor movement, which either in total or in part formed an important influence on every future mainstream JLC caliber, from the 889 derivatives to those like the caliber 750 chronograph that would be derived from the auto tractor architecture. So this watch spawned an army of JLC movements, and this really is patient zero in that respect. But on the wrist, you can see that the watch represents a crossroads between the traditionally sized watch and the modern oversized watch, which kind of fits the early 2000s profile of a sports watch. 41.5 millimeters. It's not exceptionally huge, but it has very full lugs, a deep case that's about 13.5 millimeters thick, and because it is a solid caseback and those lugs aren't curved in any way, they're large, they're full figured, you can see from the side they're very deep. It weighs on the wrist substantially. Not oppressively heavy, but it's got a premium pull and a heft that's a little bit surprising even by the standards of a gold watch. I have this same case, 41.5 millimeters, on a Grand Memovox in platinum, and I gotta say, on the wrist, this gold watch does not feel any lighter than the platinum Grand Memovox. So it's exceptionally substantial, but you can see that the size is reasonable. Now, red gold, in terms of aesthetics, is much warmer than steel, much warmer than platinum. It's a good complementary match for just about any skin tone because it is so rich and warm. Yellow gold is a little bit cold, but if you're going to go with a sports watch in colored gold, red is definitely the way to go. Now, the caseback has a nice cupped shape to it. So because it does have a little bit of a convex form, the watch nestles into the skin a little bit deeper and it sits lower. Because the bezel has significant tumble home and the crystal itself is a little bit curved, you do have a chance of slipping this one under a dress cuff or a long sleeve if you want to keep the watch on after a day of action and fun and wear it to dinner, the movies, the opera. It actually does not sit that high on the wrist, so you've got that option, and with the rose gold in a JLC manufactured case, you've got the aesthetic flexibility. Now, the strap itself is worthy of a shout out because it's a beautiful piece. Now, it has a tapered bolster, meaning as you get closer to the case, it thickens up and it has semi-conforming end horns, so it's a nice match to the contour of the case, and it thickens up to match the bulk of the lug, but as you move away, it becomes very soft and supple and the bolstering tapers off. The contrasting stitch is a nice detail that's complementary to the white of the indices and the print on the dial. So the color palette of this watch is very well chosen, but also very well coordinated, and it's capped off by a beautiful double deployant JLC buckle. Like their cases and their movements, JLC builds their buckles in-house. This one's very robust, so I want to pop that open and show you the double deployant. This was the second generation deployant buckle developed by JLC. The first generation, which was a single swing arm deployant, could be a little bit difficult to size for a smaller wrist, and it would tend to pinch a little bit if you wanted to cinch it down for smaller sizing. The double deployant is much easier to use. I know I own both. This one is much more, I would say, user-friendly, regardless of your wrist size, but especially if you have a smaller wrist. And because it's made by JLC, the fit and the finish is just as good as any of their cases and movements. It also nicely counterweights the weight of this watch on your wrist, so when it's buckled, it doesn't have any tendency to capsize in spite of its weight at the watch head. But the centerpiece of every JLC watch is the movement, and the dial is your window into that world. It's your interface with the machine beneath. JLC built the Compressor GMT sort of in the image of the Polaris 68, with big, broad, trapezoidal indices, but from there the company elaborated and modernized. Big trapeze hands in corresponding 18 karat rose gold and occasional gold printing on the dial really complete and complement the color scheme nicely. everything's loomed abundantly. So when you look at this watch at night, you can really see at a glance what time it is. So legibility, functionality is superb. What JLC does here is they give you complication. A second time zone, you can see there's a skeletonized trapeze hand, and if you like, you can actually move it independently and superimpose the local reference time hour hand over that, or rather the local time hand over the reference time hand, so that the watch appears to be a conventional balanced two-hand watch, and then when you want, you pop out that skeletonized reference time hand, and it's there when you need it. It's basically invisible when you don't. Naturally, being a GMT-style dual-time watch, it does have to have a 24-hour indicator for that second time zone, and you've got it right here at 12 with an AM/PM indication and a small golden hand that traces a 24-hour arc, a single circuit per day. The watch features a great deal of detailing. All of the applied indices are polished white gold with inset luminova. Everything you see is finished to a high horology degree, and the dial has an interesting finish on the chapter ring, which is calibrated 0 to 60, as well as the dial itself with a sort of semi-matte metallic. I've heard this referred to as the galvanized treatment. So the watch is somewhere between, I would say somewhere between a matte finish and a gloss lacquer. It's sort of a neither world, being somewhat reflective but not shiny. It's really an intriguing and singular treatment that is appropriate to the tone of the rose gold case. It doesn't compete with it, it complements it nicely, and that's sort of the theme of this watch's aesthetics. Now, the Compressor Crown was an important innovation in the early 2000s, a JLC original, and it was one of the few truly inventive solutions to the question of replacing and removing the shortcomings of a traditional screw-down crown. The screw-down crown is great when the seals are fresh and it's lubricated, but over time, constantly threading it in and out is going to wear down the seals of the crown. It's also very difficult to do on a screw-down crown when your hands are wet, when they're sweaty, when you're wearing gloves. So having this wing nut on the outside, the so-called compressor crown, gives you easy purchase, and it's also color-coded. So white you're tight, now you have a 100-meter water resistance, that's 330 feet, and red you're dead. But you can use the crown, so if you want to wind it, if you want to pull it out and set the time, set the indications of the date, the second time zone, you can easily do that without having to thread it out, thread it in the process wearing out the seals in the threaded stem tube. The nice thing about the compressor system is that it's just a compression key that compresses and decompresses a toroidal seal, so there's not actually a threaded element of the stem moving through that seal constantly. So not only is it easier to use, but it does preserve the hermetic seal of your watch longer, allowing the watch to remain water resistant longer. A great engineering solution by JLC, and very distinctive and stylish at the same time. Now, the case back of the watch is not quite as exciting as the dial, although it does give a shout out to JLC's Master 1000 Hours Control. Originally introduced in 1992, it was the first really comprehensive factory in-house chronometry standard to be introduced as a competitor to the long stagnant COSC. 1000 hours, so compare that to roughly 15 days of the COSC test, 1000 hours, well over 40 days of a fully cased up watch, mind you, not a bare movement, including dynamic winding, hand winding, power reserve, shock, temperature, magnetism tests, as well as validation of power reserve and watertight integrity. It was a holistic battery that every watch had to pass after 2004, with the exception of the caliber 101 microcaliber. And in case I need to state the perfectly obvious, that's not what we've got here, because underneath this solid gold caseback is the caliber 975 Auto Tractor. Very tough, built for the way people wear sports watches in the 21st century. That is, all the time and without mercy. Free-sprung escapement, full balance bridge, ceramic, unlubricated, sealed-for-life rotor bearings, a hairspring built for JLC to its own design by its sister company A. Lange & Söhne in Germany, laser welded at the collet where it joins the regulator or rather at the collet where it joins the balance and the stud where it joins the regulator. Very tough. In every respect, this is a watch that can take a licking and keep on ticking at 4 Hertz. Moreover, it featured a new gear profile that JLC had joined a consortium of watchmakers to design called the Spire Cut. More efficient, it also aids watch longevity. This watch features all the tricks, and as with all JLC calibers, it is nevertheless hand finished before it goes into the case. Modern, rugged, contemporary in size, style, and technology, the Master Compressor GMT, even 10 years after its debut, remains a masterclass in high-end luxury watchmaking, haute horologerie in the sports watch sector. This watch, 41.5 millimeters in 18 karat rose gold, can be seen on our website, Watch You Want.